everybody. Steve Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to continue our exploration of positivity and negativity and neutrality and where those things happen to live on the change grid and how they tend to express themselves in different ways depending on where on the change grid you happen to plop. Since last we spoke, we've had our little Thanksgiving holiday, and so I ended up with a lot of time to ponder the diagram I'm showing you on the screen right now. And that's where we just made these concentric circles, created these rings where we could say toxic negativity tends to live at the extremes on the change grid, so very close to and including the powerless point in each of the four directions. And then negativity precedes that, moving towards the center of the change grid, toxic positivity, which we're kind of talking about right now, and then we'll get into just general positivity. Then we have a question mark about whether or not there's such a thing as toxic neutrality. I just put it in there, so thinking the pattern might hold true. And then neutrality in the middle, as we've talked about before, that the center of the change grid is about learning how to dissociate oneself from whatever's going on, maintain a little bit of I would say emotional, psychological, perhaps even physical distance from whatever might be going on in the world around you. So the detachment is what it's all about there. So, but as the thoughts kind of went on around this, one of the things that I started to think more about was a comment made in passing last time around. And that is that although these are being depicted as rings and the rings are all being depicted as of equal width, that's totally arbitrary, purely for design. I had to fit the words in. The thought that was brought up was that any one of these bands could actually change its scope, if you will. And so maybe the toxic positivity is a tiny little band and positivity could be wider. As I thought more and more about that, I thought that's probably really far more likely to explain what we encounter as we go about doing our work and living our lives. So if I said based on how someone has been trained, how someone has been conditioned, perhaps even someone's personality, each of these bands could be dramatically wider than another band would be. And so thinking about the situation that originally gave rise to us wanting to have this series of discussions, there are probably people whose toxic negativity band isn't as wide as we're showing it, but it might actually be so wide that it pushes regular negativity and toxic positivity even more to the center, to the center, because again, these are radial trends. So how many people do we know that spend very little time in a positive sort of mode, forget toxic positivity for a second, and instantly get into negativity and even toxic negativity? So it may very well be that their bands are much more distorted than what we are showing here as a balanced kind of bandwidth for each one of those. Did what I just rattle off make sense for you guys? Do I?
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well,
yeah.
And it could be situational too. Couldn't it be also very temporary that you could go migrate very quickly based on our situation or encounter?
I love that thought. I love that thought that it could be very much situation specific. Yeah, I think it's true. And so does that then give us the possibility that through good awareness, through good deliberate intentional thinking and certain practices being adopted, that we could expand perhaps the size of our positive response state and reduce what negativity might be? I mean, is this something that's workable?
Yeah, I think so too. Excuse me for jumping in again.
Please do.
But when I see toxic negativity, I also see hostility. And when somebody's negative and hostile, very dominant, let's say outgrid, that would trigger submissive hostility, the toxic neutrality maybe here.
Yes, right.
And that if somebody is toxic or submissive, neutral or hostile, that would also trigger the bad behavior in that. So I think what you're saying is, how do we respond mindfully so we don't kind of each reinforce these behaviors or states we don't want to be in?
That's right. That's right. And I think that I'm trying to remember the model that talked about hostility and what the opposite of hostility was, but I seem to remember it was warmth. So if I'm not being hostile, maybe we're replacing hostility with warmth. Anyway, let's just play with that. I don't remember exactly what the model used. But when I think about where warmth might live, and I'm talking about interpersonal kind of warmth, that feels like it would resonate far more with positivity and perhaps even neutrality to a certain degree. And so maybe the way that we chase away the hostility is by cultivating the warmth that might exist between people. So maybe that's more about collaboration, cooperation. So Peter, in psychological models, do you have an opposite of hostility?
Yeah, I would say collaboration
Okay.
comes up, and I see the warmth would be, and I think trust is that when
Mhm.
there's hostility or that negativity, it boosts levels of cortisol, the fight or flight. We become very
Yes,
defensive, and
yes.
then when we are open and collaborative and let's say respectful, as Carl Rogers said, unconditional positive regard, we can be genuine. So when we have
Mhm.
trust, we can engage in productive conflict. So then move it to a place where we're setting appropriate boundaries or solution. But I
Mhm.
think the reactive mode is we become triggered, we judge somebody, and then we act in ways to make people behave to justify how they feel or how we feel. So we'll act in a way to make people behave to justify how we already feel about them.
Interesting. And so you've used words like genuine, warm. Another one I thought of was
Mm-hmm.
authentic.
Mm-hmm.
These all seem to be attributes, if you will, that live more inside of the positive ring and perhaps even more into the neutrality kind of thing. So maybe those have a bit of a span, but they're canceled out when the top positivity might become toxic or when negativity comes into play. And certainly toxic negativity would be the killer of those qualities. Hmm, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and T, what would you say about unresponsiveness? So there's neutrality, but let's say it could be a defense mechanism or defensive if someone I see is hostile or toxic, negative, and then if I become really neutral, I'm not responding, I'm unresponsive, and I'm kind of like putting up barriers. So I'm not going to let this person impede me. But then I guess it's important, but in the long term, is it healthy?
Well, I think now you're talking a bit about toxic neutrality. So let's go there for a couple of minutes and see what we might find. Um, so when we think about someone being neutral, again, we're talking about all those characteristics that are at the exact center of the change grid. So this is where people can become detached, but they practice the art of caring, detachment, and that word caring becomes important because when I'm practicing the art of caring, detachment, I am still observing the world around me. And I'm still assessing how that world around me may be impacting others. But I have not formed my own emotional connection to those observations yet. The moment I form any sort of an emotional connection, I would say that I'm no longer neutral. I'm leaning a particular way. I'm adopting perhaps a mindset or a mission sort of thing, and that's hopefully going to move me into action. So this idea about someone using neutrality as a way of escaping or a way of deliberately not taking a stand in order to insulate themselves or protect themselves, that to me starts feeling like not genuine neutrality, but neutrality that's being exploited for someone else's I want to say management of their own thoughts and feelings about what's going on or situation. Thoughts about that, Peter or Boris, David, Linda?
It's
I think toxic neutrality is someone who uses it as a lever.
Oh, tell us about that. Give us an example of that.
Well, someone who sees the rationality in another line of thinking or a position, but because it doesn't necessarily match with their desires or their objectives, they just become toxically neutral to everything.
Right. Okay. Let's dive into that a little bit. I can certainly see how someone who is in a meeting and has an opinion about a direction things could go, and others are not of that opinion, could either try to build the case for their opinion being the right way to go, which would feel more of an outgrid kind of a behavior, or they could say, well, let's look at all the different possibilities. And so they're kind of deliberately moving someone into a neutral place, hoping then, or at least implying then, that all possible ways of moving are going to be explored. When in truth, if it's just toxic neutrality, they probably already have an agenda.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's interesting, using toxic neutrality as a tool of manipulation.
Or would toxic neutrality be when you just don't say anything? Now, it might be toxic to yourself not to say anything,
Right.
or toxic to the meeting not to say anything.
Yeah. And that's how I was originally thinking of toxic neutrality when I first typed those words there. I thought this is something when a person's individual personal neutrality ends up becoming counterproductive or even destructive for their own life. You know, like people who go like, I'm always going to stay neutral. I'm never going to have my own opinion. I'm never going to exercise my own thoughts, will, whatever. I'm just going to stay neutral. Well, makes you wonder what's their purpose behind adopting that positioning. So I'll throw that to you guys. Do you think that's its own form of toxicity, but it's directed more towards the individual?
I think so. Yeah, I think that, and another word comes up too. I think in addition to that could be, reminds me of my daughter when she's a teenager. Whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Whatever. It's kind of like, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot behind the word whatever. And yes, go ahead.
Could toxic neutrality be well? I said before it's a lever. It's a tool. It's a tool to not let something settle rationally. And I actually was thinking about this. I see this a little bit in our society today with this whole thing about shots, no shots.
Yep.
You know, it's toxically neutral.
Yeah. So give us a little bit more story behind that, because my head went 3 different directions that we could go with that discussion.
Well,
yeah.
I'm seeing, people like my son who, don't want to get the shot, or my brother who doesn't want to get the shot, or other people who don't want to get the shot. And their whole position seems to be toxic neutrality. It's not that they have an opinion against the shot or for the shot. They just have no interest in it whatsoever.
Right. And that toxic neutrality could be a bit upgrid, outgrid, downgrid, or ingrid. So it could take a lot of different sorts of things. Well, let me throw this at you a little different angle. What if you're the person, you're in the middle, neutral about the whole thing, and from your neutral place, from your art of caring detachment experience, you have now formulated an opinion about the right way to proceed. And instead of moving in that direction, you continue to maintain a neutral position around it. So I guess this is when people who really are passionate about, well, because you brought up vaccines, passionate about people getting vaccinated, but decide not to really say or do anything with that passion, with that opinion. They are staying neutral, but their neutrality could be harming themselves and others. So they're at a place of risk, like when you're describing a family situation. If you decide to put forth a stronger case about why they should be vaccinated, and they continue to choose not to do that, you could be harming the relationship that you have with them. In which case, is it safer, better to remain neutral around
Yeah, I
this?
think that's what a vast majority of people are doing, because they don't want to ruin relationships. They have an opinion, but they stay neutral just to keep the relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think that a part of that is just kind of practical adjustment to the reality of whatever the situation happens
But
to be right now. Yeah.
and building on that, what you and Linda shared too, I have a friend that he's a radiologist, but he's strongly against vaccines, but he presents his case as if that's the way it is. It's almost like being bullied. And so to maintain a relationship, I feel like I have to be toxic neutral or neutral to it. Although, there's a sense that, people are dying. And if he's challenged on that, I'm not a good scientist. You're insinuating I'm not a good scientist, haven't done my research. And the hard thing is, here's someone very bright who is published, but he's taken a position, and on my end, that people are dying. So
yeah,
there's
it's
that
funny,
toxic neutrality.
He's a radiologist. It's like me, because I seem to stir up trouble. I would want to say to him, well, the next time I need to have an X-ray interpreted, I'm going to go to an immunologist. So, it's kind of like, buddy, that's not your field. If you want people to respect you as a radiologist, you should be respecting what the doctors are saying in infectious disease. So I don't want my x-rays read by an infectious disease expert. Anyway, it's just kind of fun if you want to challenge people's basis for it. Let's apply this whole concept to kind of a bigger thing. When we think of countries, I think that one of the hallmark characterizations of Switzerland is that they tend to be neutral. Well, when does neutrality become a problem? So I don't know enough about the war. I'm not a history buff, but I wonder, I assume Switzerland never did take a specific role one way or another. Isn't that how they ended up earning this reputation of being neutral? But what does it say about any group when that group recognizes that there is another group that is being harmed? And while they could say something that could make a difference, and probably should say something so that that difference could occur, they choose to remain neutral. Is that a form of toxic neutrality?
Yeah, I would say that in the case of World War II, being neutral, I'm sure their bank coffers were filled with the monies from, many of these horrible, companies that were doing things that, if by being neutral, weren't they also complicit?
Isn't that interesting? There you go. There you go. So, and we can apply that even, lately we've been thinking a lot about healthcare in the US, because my next birthday, 6 months from now, I'll be 65. And so, as you can imagine, I'm being pursued now by all the Medicare Advantage sorts of plans. And I will never choose Medicare Advantage for no other reason than those plans are being offered by for-profit insurance companies, and I believe it is morally wrong for anyone to profit from the sickness of another human being. And so I can't go that route just because I hold that personal belief. But I look at it and kind of go, how many people recognize that Medicare Advantage is only an advantage to the insurance companies? They know that, but they remain neutral instead of stepping forward and saying, you guys need to really understand how profitable Medicare Advantage is, and what could ultimately happen if it's allowed to continue to operate the way that it operates. So that's the thing. It's like, when does neutrality become a problem? When do we have to say to someone, even if we go back to like the Vietnam War, neutrality would have been the conscientious objectors. So when does that become something that is harmful to oneself, harmful to others near and dear, others in general, society as a whole? When do we have to say that neutrality is also a problem? Yeah, thoughts about that? Is it something worth pursuing?
Yeah, well, I wonder if the conscientious objector, they're not being neutral. They're saying this is wrong. I will have no part of
Oh,
this.
yeah, that's true. They're neutral about one thing because they're super passionate about another.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and those things happen to be at odds with one another.
Yeah,
So there you go. Which
yeah.
makes me wonder, is there really any form of does toxic neutrality exist? Or has simply another agenda item taken precedent that that person feels very positive about? Yeah, it's interesting.
I see neutrality as something that's positive, but toxic neutrality, someone who won't be moved and refuses to be moved or refuses to move,
Right.
that's not a positive.
Right, take a stand. That's not on its way. That's using neutrality in
As
a
a
negative.
weapon.
And it makes you wonder, is that neutral at all?
Right.
Or is a form of negativity? Okay, like why would a country remain neutral? Either because it serves them on some other agenda item very positively, or they don't want to bring in the reality something that they believe is negative. So, yeah.
I think the word denial might come into this too, that as long as I can deny an unpleasant reality, I don't have to address it or even see it. So maybe the toxic neutrality is denial, perhaps driven by denial.
It could very well be denial. Now, it'd be interesting to see whether denial is something we would encounter in the upgrid section of toxic neutrality, or outgrid, ingrid, or downgrid, as the case may be. So I guess I'm very intrigued by the concept of toxic neutrality, whether it even exists, whether it's just another way that negativity expresses itself. Because didn't we say last time around that even toxic positivity has a negativity element underlying it? Like,
or even an agenda.
even an agenda, because we were talking about what happens if people do these. What are the messages that someone might be delivering in order to manipulate and control another segment of the population? Maybe toxic positivity is where that lives, because they're trying to give you, like, for example, someone who's outgrid toxic positivity. They would be saying to you, I'm the one who can help you do that. Yes, we're in a very difficult situation, but I and I alone have the ability to help you do that. So you can count on me, support me, and I'll take care of everything for you. Or I'll keep the threat at bay, whether that threat is the perception of China or whether it's this, that, or the other thing. They have to imply, to be out here, they have to say that there is a very powerful threat, but they and they alone have the ability to meet that threat head on and make it a non-issue for everyone else. Well, that feels like toxic positivity used as a thing. Actually, they probably are packaging it as a negative situation, but they are the positive remedy to it. And so that's a manipulation with toxic positivity at its core. Yeah, interesting.
Well,
All right.
could it be also a delusion, say like with the election?
Oh, yeah.
Despite the courts and
Mm-hmm.
all these lawsuits, just being thrown out,
Yeah.
to still believe I won the election,
Yeah.
maybe that toxic positivity, there's a delusional component to it.
There, absolutely. I think the further we go away from the center in any direction, the more delusional we become. The delusion, I think, changes like out here, outgrid. This is an active delusion that's being promoted, perhaps in a very deliberate and calculated way. Where upgrid, I think I could also be delusional, but I have no ability to do it. And I'm really feeling like really am in harm's way. I might be over representing the threat that I'm facing and underrepresenting my abilities. So that's where the delusion is coming into play. But I'm probably, other than, getting everybody else around me to try to save me, I don't, I feel that's a very different energy than being outgrid would kind of bring along with it. Thoughts about that? Boris, you're being
Makes sense.
particularly quiet, but you're
Yeah.
unmuted. Feel free to chime in.
I'm just listening in an interesting conversation.
Oh, I'm so glad you find it interesting, because I'm finding it increasingly perplexing. But that's good. It'll settle out. It'll settle out sooner or later. Sooner or later.
Well,
So, yeah. Oh, yay. I like it.
Yeah. You know what I wonder, T, to add to this, you've done so much on, the when we talked about propaganda, and the constant misinformation and disinformation that triggers people's anger, anxiety. I would wonder if there's that element. What you see there's just a constant conditioning of fear, and
Right.
negativity that we get from the news media that, unless we have boundaries around that we can go, certainly that an average person who's unsuspecting, may unwittingly actually go there.
I think you're absolutely right, because my concern right now, and why I have been giving so much thought to this recently, is that I genuinely believe that each one of these bands is in constant flux when it comes to its width. And I think that if people really have that steady diet of negative messages, they end up developing negative beliefs, negative attitudes, they move into negative practices, and sooner or later that negativity becomes part and parcel to their way of operating and way of looking at life. So what just happened there? This negativity band got wider and wider and wider. And even the toxic negativity band gets wider and wider. Well, what's being pushed away then is positivity and neutrality are being pushed to being a smaller and smaller range that people are experiencing.
I think on many levels too. If you think about climate, I have a daughter in Moab, and I think she's suffering climate anxiety. What's her future going to be? And with the steady stream of news about and then witnessing and experiencing the heat, the droughts, the floods, the fires. I think that toxic negativity is, you feel bad about your situation in the future.
Right. And then you begin to share those messages with others. So the toxicity spreads beyond your individual experience and starts to impact those that are near and dear around you. And, ultimately it becomes the subject matter. I can relate to what she's saying. Yesterday, I was driving to my personal training, and listening to NPR, as I often do, and they had somebody from one of the forestry services. I don't remember who he is, but he said that part of the problem now living where we live in this western coast, and particularly, pretty much top to bottom, is that they used to think of and operate as though fires were a season that someone would go through. And now they're realizing it's a year-round thing. I think they were talking about health damages that people that are forest fighters experience that people that are structural firefighters don't experience. Because they were saying that structural firefighters tend to be called upon because a building is on fire. They go, they put the fire out. That could take an hour, that could take several hours, but sooner or later it's out. Where the people that are doing these forest fires are there for days, if not weeks. And now it's expanding to something that could simply be a year long, a never ending sort of a need. So she's right, that the environment most definitely is changing. And so if you apply to that, the toxic negativity would be all the doom and gloom naysayers who are, talking Armageddon and things of biblical proportion coming true. And then you've got the people who are just negative, that are going, this is a bad situation. The toxic positivity people would say, but there's still lots of good things that are happening. We still have great this, great that, great that. But there's fewer and fewer people who can be positive, because the positive people, even any of the neutral people, are seeing things as they truly are. Particularly neutrality sees that positivity tends to be biased. But this population is shrinking. And that may need to happen for people to finally say, we can't be neutral about this anymore. We need to take a stand. We need to recognize that there is no saving the earth. The earth will be just fine long after this human species that infests the planet and does little, if anything, good for it is gone. So Earth will be just fine. Was that a negative message? Did I just get delivered? Was that? I don't really know. Where did I just go there? Yeah, David.
It's Boris.
Or Boris, yes.
You're bringing up an interesting thing. This is why this topic is resonating with me in the back of my mind. I see the change grid is all about the individual, right? It's their perceived ability and challenge around whatever's going on. But then what you're bringing in here somehow seems like a third dimension. It's almost like, we'll use COVID as the example. It's an extrinsic outside event that you have no control over. So you have no perceived challenge around it or ability, because it has nothing you can do about it.
Well, I would say to you that people may all agree that they have little ability to do anything about it, but I'll bet they would report the range of challenge quite differently.
Well, here's what I mean about this. So I'm going to use myself and my wife as an example. We're polar opposites in this, because for me, this was a non-event. In essence, I wasn't in any way worried about my ability or my challenge to deal with the situation. I just kind of dealt with it very resiliently. It's going to be what's going to be, and I'm going to deal with it.
Right.
She freaked out. She went on the other extreme. Every bit of news, everything that came out was a new reason to get excited and worried. And, and every bit of that made her completely incapable of dealing with the stuff, right? The toxic.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, because that's those messages were moving her further and further up grid. Yep.
Right, and that's what is interesting to me, is how these outside forces that we don't have control over can move us around, as opposed to us just naturally.
Well, and I would add to it this, which is I think the scariest part of the whole thing is that the outside force itself is neutral. Regardless of what the outside force might happen to be, we have to deal with. It's the media that ultimately creates the awareness and frames that awareness in ways that manipulate people into one camp or another camp for whatever their own devices happen to be. So
look at what happened to the stock market on Monday when this Omicron variant came out. It moved the stock market.
It did. But did it move the stock market, or did the reporting on it?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was the reporting on it.
Yeah, because in the good old days,
there's no information available as to, we know that it is highly transmissible and a lot of variants and everything else, but we don't know the impact of the variant.
Yeah, right. We don't. Now, okay, I do have a background in biology and all that, and that was my little what I thought I was going to do. And one of the things that I learned about viruses is that viruses are not stupid. So viruses never want to kill their host, because if the virus kills the host, what happens to the virus?
Dies.
It dies as well. And so the purpose of mutations is for the virus to become increasingly contagious, but less deadly. So if you're the virus, you're the king of a particular virus, and your whole following is saying, help us build our kingdom, you would be saying to the kingdom, well, we need to be able to spread as quickly as we possibly can to as many as we possibly can, but we don't want to make them so sick that they end up dying. Wouldn't that be the smart thing for you as a king of a virus to be pursuing? Yeah. And so I think that's ultimately what's happening with not only this virus, but how many other viruses have come into the reality of human existence, wreaked havoc for a certain period of time, only to be, what I would say, incorporated into the reality of human existence. So we have to deal with it one way or another on an ongoing basis.
So COVID becomes our new flu.
COVID becomes the new flu. Now, if we go back a couple of 100 years ago, when a lot of these viruses came and wreaked havoc before anyone could even think about doing anything, and probably didn't even have the ability to do much all about it, how quickly did the general public find out about even the existence of it?
Oh my God. Could have taken months.
Months, if ever.
Yeah.
They may have been totally oblivious. In fact, each local area where an outbreak happened may very well have come up with a different name for whatever it was that their population was experiencing. So was it the bubonic plague? Was it the Black Death? What was it? They didn't have any coordinated understanding. Science wasn't there. Medicine wasn't there. But at least word spread so slowly that it was something that didn't terrify the population of the planet all at once. Well, today, what happens the moment you let someone today say, oh, forget Omicron, we're all the way up to Epsilon or whatever one is next. How fast before the rest of the world hears of Epsilon?
A day, maybe.
A day, maybe. Someone's going to start tweeting it. It's going to get Instagrammed. Yeah. Associated Press is going to put it out there on the wire, and everyone's going to go crazy. So ultimately, I really do believe that whether we're talking about the stock market, we're talking about disease progression, we're talking about any belief that someone might hold, we need look no further than the media for the not only the cause of the chaos, but the remedy for the chaos as well. What messages are they sending? You keep in mind that right now, if all the media that there is started talking about how healthy the economy was, what do you think would happen to the economy?
It'd get healthy.
It would get healthy because people would start behaving in accordance with those beliefs. And off they would go. But as long as we're hearing messages that, oh, we're in a recession or whatever, guess what we're going to be in?
Yeah. So it reminds me of a quote by Wayne Dyer that what we focus on expands.
What we focus on expands. And who directs our focus more consistently, routinely, powerfully than any other influencer? It's going to be the media, particularly when now anyone with a Facebook channel, a Facebook page, or anyone with a YouTube channel is an influencer. They're part of the media. So it's called social media for a reason. Isn't that terrifying? It's like,
it's like the flock mentality. It's like a herd of gazelles jumping off a cliff.
Yeah. And so because of the power of that messaging as a way of managing other people's tension, we could very well be looking at the demise of our global culture, if you will, our global species, all because of the media and the messages it's putting out there. So
it reminds another quote too. I forget who says it. I love quotes. I often forget the authors, but there's one that said, if you can make people believe the ridiculous, you can make them do the unthinkable.
Oh yeah, I forget who that was. I saw that little meme as well.
Yeah.
If you could make them believe the ridiculous, they'll do. Yeah. And then even, was it James Allen who wrote As a Man Thinketh? You remember that little book long ago?
Yes.
Yeah.
I had it. I lost it, but yeah, that was James Allen.
Yeah, and that was a real simple thing that we become whatever we think of.
Mm-hmm.
And so what our thoughts are filled with ultimately gives rise to whatever the next version of ourselves. So it's
Mhm.
like this awareness of the power of the mind has always been around. But now this idea about the power of the media to do that. I had a friend back in the days when I lived in Ann Arbor who'd gotten his PhD in communications, and now he's a professor at one of the Florida universities and talks about mass media and all that. So I don't remember all of it, but basically his dissertation was about the federal government's conscious use of the media in order to shape the public's impression of a particular culture. And what he was talking about was the Latin sorts of culture. So I don't remember what year it would have been, but when did Carmen Miranda and Ricardo Montalban and all of these Latin sorts of early year actors and singers, how did they come to be, and how were they viewed by the general public? You guys remember any of that?
Well,
Sure.
there's quite a bit of
Back in the
history on that. I
70s.
think it was the 50s.
Yeah, because they were basically telling us, if I said, describe someone who's from a Latin culture, based on what we were told back in the 1950s, how were they framed?
Ricky
They were
Ricardo.
right, and so they were. Give me some words.
Latin lover.
Passionate.
Well, here's Linda goes, Latin lover,
Right.
passionate, vibrant and alive, sophisticated, cultured. You know, there were all of these interesting kinds of identifiers because the federal government, for whatever reason, was trying to strengthen the relationships between the US and these sorts of nations. Why it decided to jump over Mexico and go all the way to Spain or to South America, I don't know. I didn't read the dissertation, but it was really interesting just to see how the media ultimately frames and greatly influences how we view other cultures, other whatever groups. Yeah.
Well, look at what's happening in Washington right now. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be partisan on this, but the Democrats seem to be blaming the media for not doing a good enough job of selling this current plan.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And by the way, you know, right now that happens to be I promise you, we could go back to any point in history and say that the White House is never really happy with what the press corps is emphasizing or not emphasizing. So yeah, that's exactly right, David. Why couldn't they put together a different set of messaging? But the media knows the power that it wields, and the media ultimately understands that the power that politicians have is an illusion. The power they have is the power that the media gives them one way or another. So it makes you now wonder, what does the media want? What are they looking for?
Eyeballs and ears.
Eyeballs and ears, because those eyeballs and ears translate sooner or later into
Advertising dollars.
advertising dollars. This is what it's really all about. It's not about news anymore. I don't even know that there's even if I think of public radio is not without its own bias and not without its own agenda. So I know in the good old days, they used to think the BBC was rather neutral in the reporting of the news. I dare say that's not so much the case anymore, considering Brexit and you know, the things they've got going on with their own lockdowns and all that because of COVID. So,
well, wouldn't you go behind that and say that there are people people who own these media companies or the businesses?
Yes,
You know, wouldn't you say that part of it is self-preservation? If I am an individual that's heavily invested, let's say in oil and gas, I don't want any bad negativity about that, and I'm going to influence whoever I can to protect my business interests.
This is exactly right. And then ultimately, you've got individuals in the world of media who are trying to set themselves up as being one of the top, you know, trusted advisors, and they're looking for an audience. And so if they find out that the liberal audience is already fully saturated with that, well, then regardless of what their own personal beliefs may be, they may say, I'm going to go after the opposite, because there's an opportunity there for me to build a following. And that following ultimately is going to increase my value or perceived value in the world of media. So I just really think that if we are ever going to find any kind of harmony, any kind of common ground, we have to recognize that the media is playing a very powerful role in this, and something has to be done, not so much to control that media, but to make sure that there is a source of truth. And that truth has to be objective. So I'm not saying get rid of the far right or get rid of the far left, or even those that are leaning one way or another. I'm saying we need to cultivate the neutral. The answer to negativity is in neutrality first, not in positivity. So who's going to be that one that just says we deliver the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and everything that we say has been fact checked by multiple fact checking sources, and only that which general consensus could be gained around is what's reported?
Well, here's a
Why do I think
question.
there's no money in that?
Yeah, well, that was my question. Where would be the market in that?
Right. I don't really know that, because the world of, again, these circles of positivity and neutrality are being pushed to being smaller and smaller and smaller by the negativity and the toxic negativity and even the toxic positivity that's being used to manipulate everyone else. Yeah, I think that we are looking at a shrinking population that may ultimately become observers of the Armageddon that will sooner or later be triggered.
Well, T, where would you? Oh, go ahead, Linda.
I was the whole time you were just setting that up, I thought, according to who?
Yeah, well, give us more on that. So what, according to who?
Facts. You were saying we need somebody to search out all the facts. And
well, yeah, and I think, if we turn to the scientific process, the whole scientific process has at its goal a quest for the truth. But there are very strict guidelines about how research is conducted, how research is then validated, how things have to be very, very carefully studied and documented before anyone could say that X is true about much of anything. So
right.
I think
well,
that we
how
have
about
to.
T? How about science according to who?
Well, I'm right. This is when you have to get all the scientific community together worldwide. And do they even have any sort of consensus around what the scientific process requires in order for a hypothesis to advance through research to being something that anyone could comfortably call a fact? So I don't know. I don't know the answer to any of this. I just know that where you'd have to begin would be by setting some rules against which everything that is explored, is accurately explored. That's why I tend to get my news from fact-checking sites, multiple fact-checking sites, because at least they're a step in the direction of someone vetting whatever is being said. Yeah.
What's your favorite fact-checking site, T?
I don't have a favorite. I find that I find that a lot of the university fact-checking sites have kind of done the best. I think Snopes is more a popular one, but I don't really think of it as being that.
T?
Yeah.
That website, All Sides, what do you think of that?
I think All Sides is really good at just being as neutral as they can be. I do like All Sides because what they try to do is anytime someone presents an article that leans heavily one direction or the other, they go out there and actively seek a balancing article. Yeah, so I don't know, Peter. I guess I'd say that I like yeah, I kind of like PolitiFact when it comes to that, but really that's the Poynter Institute. And so I never know what's the Poynter Institute. Where's their position? But, you know, at least they've won a Pulitzer Prize for their fact checking. I think that truth or fiction is fun, but it tends to focus more on the more popular things, rumors, hoaxes, that sort of thing. The Washington Post also has a good fact-checking website, but you can't see it unless you subscribe to the Washington Post. And I do believe that the Washington Post itself is highly biased. So
Yeah.
I don't know about that. There's one called the Sunlight Foundation. The thing is that they don't publish very much, but they tend to focus on the role of money in politics. So they're shedding light on where dark money is and that sort of a thing. So even they have an agenda. So I don't really know. That's why I think that the very best thing that you can do is read multiple sources. And Linda mentioned allsides.com. That's one. There's also a media bias fact check.com. What it does is it really scrutinizes the fact checking websites and tries to expose any kind of bias that's in the way. Yeah. But even if you go to their thing, mediabiasfactcheck.com, I just went there to just see, they probably list a good 3 or 4 dozen so-called fact-checking sites. Oh, more than that, there's hundreds of them if you really scroll down through there. But yeah, go to mediabiasfactcheck.com. And you might find that to be a very eye-opening one, but never rely on only one. You know, look at all of them, because I got to believe they all have their agenda, and most of them are being funded by somebody. So you would think whoever's funding them is not all that likely to be neutral.
True.
So, but yeah, anyway, there you go. Yeah.
Question: where would you on this, if you could even, where would you kind of chart moral courage and creative courage? You know, so now if you think about people who have courage in a real way to say, all right, we don't want this train to keep on going. Where might you put that?
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting thing to look at, because as I move in different directions, I can't move too far, but as I move in different directions, I think that whole fearlessness is going to change. Like when I think of fearlessness found outgrid, that's the fearlessness to go after something you really, really want. Where when I think about fearlessness that is found upgrid, this is more the thrill seekers, you know, who want to jump in before they really figure out what they're jumping into. And I think the downgrid, there's a fearlessness that comes from having the facts at hand, knowing what's really going on in a certain situation. And then the fearlessness we find in grid is the fearlessness to step up to the plate, to help others, to be defending others and all that. So fearlessness, I think, is going to fit inside of that positivity kind of circle, but it could be in any one of the directions and change. You said fearlessness, and what other word did you use?
So moral courage, creative courage.
Yeah, creative courage. I don't know, you guys want to throw some ideas out? That feels to me a little bit more outgrid.
Out and up.
Out and up. Yeah, because where I think about moral courage definitely feels in grid, maybe downgrid a little bit, but I would just say to you that I don't know that people that are upgrid are all that morally driven. I don't think people that are outgrid are necessarily all that morally driven, although I'm sure we could find certain charities that are very outgrid in their operations and very moral in their conduct. Downgrid, I don't know that people that are downgrid, they might be driven by more of an internal moral compass, but I don't know. Yeah. Thoughts, David, Boris?
I think you make sense with it, but you know, courage just seems to be more of an out and upgrade type of behavior or state.
Yeah. And you know, if we actually look at the adjective map, courageousness is only found outgrid, because so is bravery, so is confidence. Those things tend to be more in this outgrid kind of thing, because courage needs a back end to it. So it's courage in the face of something. So I don't know that I could just walk around my daily life on the planet and say I'm courageous. Courageous when? Courageous
How?
how? Right. Under what circumstances? So that it still feels like it's going to be dependent on me stepping up to whatever it is. Where when I think about the word courage being used upgrid, I also want to say that upgrid carries a high level of delusion. So are they really courageous, which is an ability to face something, or is their fearlessness and their courageousness really just stupidity? So I don't know. I don't know. I always wonder when people are doing things like bungee jumping and these kinds of experiences that we can only hope the safety mechanisms are operating. Is that really courage? Is that really fearlessness? Or is that
good question.
Tempting fate? I don't know. Toxic positivity. Perhaps that's what it is. I believe I can fly, so I'm jumping out of this airplane. Really? Can I offer you a parachute? So, just saying. So I've seen these people with flight suits. I don't know what they call them, but they basically look like a flying squirrel. I hope they have a safety parachute on their back somewhere, but they tend to just like jump out of a plane and spread out their arms and legs to try to catch as much air as they can. And then they try to basically fly, or at least, glide their way down. I dare say they don't come in for a landing on their belly.
Too bad Brian's not on this call. He can give us the medical assessment of why these people do what they do.
Right.
Got to be a chemical piece to this.
Well, and even, when we started talking about the people that are willing to, when Lynn and I were considering moving to New Mexico, we learned a lot about smoke jumpers. So smoke jumpers are actually people that get aboard a small airplane and are flown to wherever smoke is coming out of a forest. And they parachute with full equipment on their back. They parachute into wherever that fire happens to be, hike over to it, assess it, report on it, hopefully put it out if they can actually self-contain it, if they got there early enough. And then they have to hike out before all of the, what do they call the people that come in afterwards? Hot shots. Come in after the smoke jumpers say we need a team of people to put this fire out. And I thought, of all of the careers you could have chosen, what kind of person decides I want to work out of or jump out of a small airplane, land in a densely forested area with it's not an exaggeration to say they got 80 to 100 pounds of equipment on their back, and then walk over to the fire, assess it, do that, and then hike out of it? I mean, I got to believe these people are either very much outgrid, very courageous, very brave, but whatever drew them to that feels like it had a little bit of upgrade craziness that came along with that. This is where we'd find adrenaline, of course, high levels of endorphins. But what do you think?
Yeah, I guess that would be the high. The thrill seeking is a high in and of itself, I guess.
It's got to be. These are sturdy folk. We saw a few of them, and these are real heroes when it comes to what they've chosen to do and the risk they put themselves
So T, would you say that individual would be more characteristically an outgrid person?
Absolutely, an outgrid person, because they've had all their training. I think that before they've had that training and they've just decided, hey, I'm going to do this, I think that craziness that might have got them interested in to begin with kind of moved them into learning more and developing the actual skills. So to the smoke jumpers that are actually out there working, I can only hope are very outgrid people. Very outgrid people. maybe not out-grid danger zone. Hopefully they don't find themselves in that kind of a situation, but they're the authorities on the ground. No one argues with a smoke jumper. So, yeah. Okay, anyway, that's our time for today. So with that, we will pick up where we left off on Thursday, and I think we'll be bringing this subject to closure. I just want to talk a little bit more about toxic positivity and toxic neutrality, just to put this to rest. And then I want to talk about how we, in the professional roles we all have, help people better manage the width of their rings. So do we help people squash the toxic rings so they move from neutrality to positivity, or from negativity to positivity? How do we help them manage their movements as we do the work that we do? So with that, thank you all very much for joining in. We'll talk again soon. So bye, everybody.
Great. Thank you, T. Good to see everybody.
Likewise. Bye.
Bye.